Good morning. On behalf of the trustees and staff of the Faculty Pension Plan, I want to welcome you all to our annual pension forum. I will begin this morning by acknowledging the land we work on. I'm coming to you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. We acknowledge that most of us here are probably joining from all across British Columbia, although we may have some members joining and tuning in from across Canada and perhaps even from around the world. But we acknowledge that wherever we may reside, we express our respect and gratitude to the traditional Indigenous caretakers of these lands. This year, the forum comes to you on Zoom. And as it happens, the use of Zoom has made this forum the most attended in our history, with over 350 registered to join us this morning. Most of us are familiar, perhaps too familiar, you might say, with Zoom, but let me remind you, you can ask questions simply by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen and type them in at any point during the meeting. We'll do our best to get to all those questions during the Q&A period, but the ones that we don't get to, we'll certainly post the questions and answers on the website following the event. But just let me say that, of course, the trustees and the staff of the plan are always ready to answer your questions anytime, and we can be contacted through the addresses that you'll find on the plan's website. Our agenda for the forum this morning is a simple one. After some comments from me by way of welcome, we'll have a report from our executive director on our finances and membership that will complement the annual report that you've been sent and can find on the website. That will be followed by an investment review by Kamila Giesbrecht, our executive director for investments, that will provide us with an account of how the pension plans funds have done this year. And then, of course, we'll turn to your questions. The UBC Faculty Pension Plan is one of the largest and one of the, we think, best run defined contribution pension plans in Canada. The plan belongs to its members. It's responsibly organized, managed, and administered by an independent board of trustees with the help of a professional in-house staff and the support of major service providers, including Sun Life. There are 8 trustees. 4 are directly elected by the members of the plan, and 4 are appointed by the Board of Governors of the university, and each serves for a 4-year renewable term. The current trustees include both active and retired members from both the Okanagan and Vancouver campuses and from the Triumph Research facility on campus. Trustees meet as a body at least 8 times a year, supplemented by subcommittee work on various projects related to both governance and financial investment management business. As you can imagine, much of our work has been challenged over the last year as we all moved online. The activity will be covered in the reports that are going to follow my comments, but let me simply point to 1 or 2 important initiatives. In response to membership interest, and after careful consideration of the trustees' fiduciary responsibilities, we were able to design and then introduce a new fossil fuel free fund, a portfolio that's made up of both equity and bond investments. The launch of that fund has been very successful, and in a short time has begun to meet members' needs and expectations. The trustees have conducted a full review of the statement of investment beliefs that governs all our investment strategies and processes, and in turn underpins decision-making from basic issues of where our resources should be invested to other questions about who should be hired to manage these funds. We continue to review and adjust the asset mix of the balance fund, which is by far the option used by most of the members. We've also maintained a disciplined watch on the record of our finance managers. Naturally, they're assessed in terms of meeting our financial goals, but we also expect them to report on how they employ critical ESG objectives in their decision-making and investment strategy. Our core objective continues to be to provide the best managed, cost-effective plan possible. In the process of doing so, we aim to provide our members with all the help we can as they engage in their own financial planning and, of course, ultimately move into retirement. Finally, let me simply conclude my comments by paying particular thanks to Joost Bloem. Joost has left the board of trustees after serving as its chair for 17 years. In that role, he provided exceptional leadership to the trustees, to the operation of the plan, and so to each and every one of its thousands of members. And we all owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. Thank you, Joost. At this point, let me turn the forum over to Orla Cousineau, our Executive Director, to provide us with a financial and membership update.
Thank you, Ken. Good morning. So I'm going to give a very quick high-level update in terms of the plan and our growth in the last year. So if I could have the next slide. So you'll see here the total plan membership. It's grown from approximately, we were at approximately 6,500 at the end of 2019, and we're just almost at 6,700. You'll see the breakdown. Actives are people who are still working for UBC. So we've got for 53% of the membership are actively working still. Deferred are people who previously worked for UBC, former employees who've left their money in the pension plan. And we've got 1,700 of them. And then retired, we've got just over 1,400 retired members. So those are people that are drawing a retirement income from our pension plan. In terms of assets, we've grown from 2.5 billion to 2.7 billion. And as Ken said, we are one of the largest defined contribution plans in Canada. And you can see the breakdown here of the assets amongst the three groups. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, if we could go back a moment. In the bottom, you can't quite see it, but an important feature of our plan is we allow people to transfer other registered monies into the plan. So of the 2.7, we had almost $6 million that was transferred into the plan last year. And the reason people would do that is that money then gets the advantage of the investment options that we have. So you've got access to institutional money managers and some mandates you wouldn't otherwise as an individual have access to. And then most importantly, very low fees. So this would be, if you had money in an RRSP elsewhere, you could transfer it into the faculty pension plan. Or if you came to UBC from another employer, you could transfer your pension, the pension you've earned in the other plan into this plan. So just wanted to highlight that because that's a really good feature of this plan. If we could go to the next slide, please. Pensions started last year. We had total assets of just over $100 million that were transferred into the retirement income options within the plan. And we're happy to say that 79% of retiring members' assets stayed in the plan. So we have 89 new people who started receiving a lift type payment, 63 receiving RIF type payments, and 24 who started variable payment life annuities. And this is something that's quite unique to our pension plan, that we provide all these retirement income options. The objective of the board and the plan is to provide members with as much flexibility as possible in terms of structuring their retirement income, and we allow them to do that within the plan. And the advantage of that is, once again, access to the same investment options you've been invested in throughout your career, and as well the low fees. And in particular, I want to mention the variable payment life annuity. People can generally elect a combination of these options. And quite often they don't elect the variable annuity until they're in their 70s. They don't do so right away at retirement. And this is a unique feature of our plan. And in fact, the federal government just in the recent budget has introduced this concept, and they're hoping to change the rules in Canada to allow other pension plans to provide annuities. So it's a unique feature. We're very lucky to have it in our plan because we're grandfathered. And so somebody approaching retirement should definitely talk to our staff in terms of understanding the benefit of it. What it does do is it provides people with the certainty of knowing they're not going to outlive their retirement savings, which is a great thing to have. We can go to the next page. Of course, with COVID, we've had to pivot, and on campus we have the PAO, or what we call the Pension Administration Office, and we have people here to provide you with member services. We're now working remotely, but we provide access via phone. Our staff have been doing a lot of one-on-one meetings via Zoom, and that's worked very successfully. And we're really here to provide you with help when events arise. So if you were leaving UBC, you would reach out and get help from us. Or if you're approaching retirement, you want to understand your options. Or if you're getting divorced or separated and you need to understand what documentation we need from you to keep your account in good order. As well, we've run workshops, and actually doing them via Zoom has allowed us to open it up and have more people participate, because before we were space constrained, and we were very often, these workshops would be fully booked and people had to be put on a wait list. As well, last year, given COVID, we did a live webcast investment update in December. And if you haven't seen that and you're interested, you can always look at it. It's posted on the website, and the questions and answers that arose from that webcast are also posted. And most years we issue 2 newsletters, and we did last year. So we talked about the launch of our new fossil fuel free investment option that Ken referenced, explained the nature of that option and how to put money into it. We also, given COVID, there was a couple of pieces on kind of investment updates in terms of and what the priorities of the board were. We announced the changes made to the real estate manager managing it within the balance fund, and Kamila will talk about that in a little more detail in a moment. And then finally, the workday changes. So for people still actively working at UBC, active members contributing to the plan, you can now, through Workday, update your personal information and make arrangements for voluntary contributions to go into the pension plan. Next slide, please. And finally, as Ken said, we have 4 board members who are elected. And in fact, this fall, we have an election for 2 trustees. It's a 4-year term, and we'll be issuing notification around that in the fall, and nomination packages will be available through UBC. And if any of you have any questions or interest in this, please reach out and contact me. My contact information is on the website. So I'd now like to turn it over to Kamila, and it will lead you through the investment update.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this event. I'm pleased to give you an update on our plan from investment point of view. On this slide, I'm showing you all the available investment options, and we have 7 of them. You can see green is really dominating this chart. This is representing our balance fund. I would call it our flagship fund, and kind of a center of universe for our universe, for our plan. As Orla already mentioned, 80% of assets are invested in this fund. It's also important to remember that that fund is something which we call default investment option. So for members who do not elect how to invest their savings, we will automatically put all your savings in this fund. And this is how it looks like at the moment. The target asset mix of balance fund is on the screen. The subcomponents, I would divide them into 4 subcomponents. And one is particularly interesting, currently built out of real estate assets divided among different geographical allocations. But what it is, that 15% right here in yellow, light blue, and green represents investments which are not traded on a public markets. The other 3 are also represented by standalone options and the standalone options are invested exactly the same way as subcomponents of the balance fund. What do I mean about this statement? If we would take a closer look at the fixed income component of the balance fund, it's managed by 3 managers: BlackRock, AllianceBernstein, and PIMCO. And the first one is with the passive mandate, the other 2 core plus active mandates. If you would look at a standalone bond fund, you would see that that fund is a mirror image of subcomponent of our balance fund. And the same is true for Canadian equity. A standalone Canadian equity fund is managed exactly the same way as this component, and the global equity is managed exactly the same as a foreign equity fund. Why I'm talking about this? I want to use this opportunity to remind our members that you have flexibility how you invest your money. For example, if you're looking at this balance fund and you think, well, this is not aggressive enough for me, I would like to have higher exposure to equities, you can easily do that. You can, for example, direct 80% of your investments into this fund and 20, let's say, into foreign equity fund. And just by doing that simple operation, you would change the overall allocation to approximately 44% global equity, 12% Canadian equity, 32% fixed income, decreasing substantially your allocation to fixed income, and 12% to real estate. Of course, percentage should be appropriate to your individual circumstances, but you can build custom solutions with our plan. And we would like to remember that and encourage you to review your current asset allocation and your circumstances on a regular basis. When we're putting together asset mix for a balance fund, as you know now even more so than before, maybe how important it is for us and for all our members, it's important to highlight what is our goal. It is really a balancing act to build appropriate balance fund. And we are focusing on risk-adjusted return. This graph here is showing you results looking at that through the lenses of risk-adjusted return. We are comparing ourselves here to similar products available in the market, other balance funds, with similar asset allocations, with similar purpose, created for investors like yourselves. And what you see here, the cross of the red lines, red axis, is showing you result for a median balance fund and the average, which is pretty close. So for simplicity, I would just call this central point as an average competitor of our balance fund. The blue dot right here is representing performance from annualized return perspective and standard deviation, which is measuring level of risk for our balance fund. As you can see, we delivered over the last 10 years better results in terms of returns, and we delivered that with lower level of risk. And this is exactly what we are aiming for. We want our balance fund to be appropriately positioned, and we're striving to be in that top left quadrant when we're looking at the results. Both Ken and Orla mentioned that board spent quite some time looking at asset mix, and a tremendous amount of work was performed last year, and we still continue to fine-tuning our new target asset mix. So this is a sneak preview to what the board is working on currently. On the left side, you can see the current policy asset mix, and on the left side, our new target asset mix. Our investigation brought us to the conclusion that the best thing for us to do right now is to increase our allocation to assets outside of public markets. So we will be increasing alternatives by 5%, and we will be diversifying this portion of the balance fund by adding a new asset, infrastructure. How are we going to do that? Well, we need to take money from somewhere. We will be decreasing overall allocation to equity by decreasing allocation to Canadian equity by 5%, but increasing a global equity by 3%. And the other missing 2% will come by decreasing 3%, sorry, will be coming from a fixed income component. Each of the public components is also under review, and we will be making some changes potentially when that review is completed. Maybe enough about balance fund for a moment. I want to give you a few details about the new option which we introduced in April last year, fossil fuel-free equity and bond fund. Please note that we didn't call it a balance fund, not yet. It is a combination of investments in equities and bonds. We can not quite add yet other asset classes. However, the size of this portfolio is at the moment at 55 million and growing. So in future, we will be looking at increasing diversification within this fund as well. And our goal will be to make this at similar level when it comes to diversification as balance fund. Currently, this fund is composed of 3 underlying funds, Canadian equity, global equity, and fixed income, all managed by one manager, Jurasowski-Fraser. This is a perfect example of board listening to the needs of the members. We definitely want to hear from you, and if there is interest or need for different options, investment options on the plan, we are here to accommodate your needs and build the best plan possibly. We're very pleased that this fund is actually utilized and members are using it. Of course, this plan has certain focus. It's focusing on investments without fossil fuels in it. I just want to assure that members who are participating in our regular options are also participating in investments where we are very conscious of ESG factors. They are all included in investment processes of our managers. So we definitely care about environment, social aspects, and good governance for all of our investments within the plan. My task here today is also to give you a quick overview of what 2020 looked like for us and how our plan weathered the environment of last year. You can recognize on this slide a lot of things you've seen in headlines. COVID-19 became a new word in our dictionary, unfortunately. And it's definitely an event which caused a lot of changes for us, also in financial environment. We noticed a record decline in economic growth area in 2020, and that affected performance of the markets. We experienced really high volatility and close to zero bond yields. Everything was supported by massive stimulus coming from governments and central banks. But if you would not see the pattern, which I will show you, of the markets, one could conclude that it was a pretty good year for investors because, for example, we're looking at Canadian equity. Canadian equity ended the year 5.6% higher than started the year. Of course, the first quarter of last year was quite painful, and you can see on this graph a big drop. I should probably mention that to see exactly what was happening in 2020, you should focus your eyes between the two vertical blue lines. So after a big drop, markets were climbing up back. with a fair amount of volatility, but as I said, ending at the higher level than it started. And that trend continued into the first quarter of 2021, as you can see, past the second blue line. The same was true for global markets. And what does that mean for an investor? If you chose to have $100 in global equity markets, you would end up a year $13 richer. If you would keep them in Canadian market, you would have $6 extra. So one could conclude that the place to be was global equities. Fixed income had a similarly successful year, 8.7% higher at the end of the year than the beginning. Also, the drop was experienced in the first part of the year. But what happened, I also want to mention this, and at the end of my presentation, I will show you numbers updated to March, that the first quarter of 2020, so past the second blue vertical line, bonds had rather challenging year, and that was a 5% drop, which historically is a very significant event for bonds. But for 2020, if you kept your money in bonds, you were $8 and a few cents richer for every $100 invested in 2020. So again, not a bad year. For our balance fund, our one-year return is noted here in the first column at the very top, 8.25%. We are happy with this result. Of course, some people would say, well, if I stayed in bonds, I would actually be better off than being in a balance fund. But I would like to highlight how dangerous it is to make judgment over a very short period of time. Considering everything what happened in 2020, I think this is a pretty good result. And definitely volatility of our fund performance throughout the year was less than being in other single asset classes. The benchmark was higher at 9.09%, just below the performance for the balance fund you can note here. And for the first time since I don't remember when, our real estate investments actually contributed to putting us behind the benchmark. And I have a special slide on that I will show you in a moment. What's important for us is that the 10-year number, which I also showed to you when we were talking about the risk versus return, is still above 8%, and it is above the benchmark. This page is showing subcomponents performance, and you can see that bonds, Canadian equity were ahead of the benchmark, and foreign equity slightly behind the benchmark. But again, overall, we're pretty happy with results. On a few next slides, I was very optimistic that I will walk you through all of them. I probably will need to skip some. But when I gave update on investments back in December, there were a lot of questions about comparing results of our funds versus other funds, other plans. Comparison is a very good exercise, and I want to assure you that we do that. And on this slide, I'm showing you the colorful line, I call it heat map, which shows me very quickly how we're doing comparing to the universe of similar products. So for the balance fund, it will be the same group of funds we saw on the risk return graph before. The universe is built out of 61 Canadian balance funds of similar quality, as I said, and built for similar purpose as our fund. For 1 year, we are in third quartile. What quartiles mean? First quartile means that we are within 25% of the top performers out there. The next 25 means that we are in the second 25, but still above, that's above median. Then the third quartile is below median, the next 25% of performance, and then the bottom quartile, which would be marked here in red, and likely we don't have one here, would mean that we are at the bottom of the bottom 25% of performance when we're comparing ourselves to peers. I don't have, so this is the balance fund. I don't have numbers for a fossil fuel free fund because at the end of the year, we didn't have a full year here, but I will be reporting that soon to you. On the next page, I'm doing the same representation of results for the fixed income. And quickly, I will just highlight that AB Core Plus stands for Alliance Bernstein. You see a bit of a redness here. This particular strategy is on watch. We will be deciding if we change potentially how we're using this strategy in our plan. But I also want to point out that sometimes red is not that bad. And the next manager who's in red here is BlackRock. Their mandate is Universe Bond Index Fund. It's a passive strategy. So although compared to the universe of other bond funds, you would conclude they're not doing so well, all we worry for the passive strategy is to keep up with the market. So we're really focusing on differential, and here it is 11 basis points for a year within our expectation, how they're tracking the market. The next one is PIMCO Canada. You see a lot of green here, so a lot of good news. Of course, this is a very simplistic way of looking at things, but this gives us kind of at a glance idea if there's something we should be paying attention to. And I wanted to share that with you. On the next page, we're looking at Canadian equity managers. I will not walk you through the numbers in the interest of time, but you have all this information here. And if you have questions, I will be happy to answer them in near future, even via emails. I'm available to you at any point of time. And the next one is showing our managers for foreign equity fund. And as I said before, foreign equity as a standalone is managed exactly the same as the subcomponent of our balance fund, global equities. And I want to spend 1 minute here on commercial real estate. As I mentioned, this component in 2020 had negative returns. But you can see historically on this page that for a 4-year period, for 10-year period, and then calendar years other than 2020, real estate is providing a steady returns for our fund, and it's playing an incredibly important role in decreasing the overall risk of the portfolio. On this page, we're showing you fees. As Orla and Ken mentioned, we're paying attention to fees. It's very important that you can get your options at a very good prices, and we're keeping our promise. Fees fluctuate from time to time when we're changing the managers, but never to a great degree. And we report this to you on a regular basis. And now return up to March 31st. 2 things I wanted to highlight. So a bond fund and bond component of our balance fund had not such a great quarter, but as I showed you on the picture, the overall market had a hard time. So the index dropped by 5%. Just an interesting note that a drop of over 5% last time we've seen in 1994, so quite some time ago, and that was triggered by a surprise increase in rates by Feds. And over the last 40 years, we've only seen bonds dropping by 5% 4 times. So this is quite an event, and it's mainly driven by very optimistic prediction of the growth, economical growth, and inflation pressures. In summary, I would like to say that our strategies did not disappoint us. We are very much aware that even with very optimistic predictions how the economy will move forward, there is a very good chance that strong recovery is already priced in by the market. So we are very much aware that in future delivering 8% returns on annual basis might be challenged. And with that in mind, we're doing the work we do. We're trying to diversify the portfolio as much as possible without adding additional risk. We're trying to squeeze that additional return for you. We're focusing on risk mitigation and capital preservation. We want our portfolios to be resilient. And I will not list all the projects which we are currently working on, but I will be happy to answer all the questions you might have. And with that, I think we can move to the Q&A.
Okay, I will ask the questions. It is stated that we can contribute more on a voluntary basis. Is there a limit and how is it taxed? Orla?
Yes, there is a limit on voluntary contributions. And so under the Income Tax Act, you'll know you get a notice of assessment from CRA every year. So you know what your RSP room is. And so if you have any unused contribution room, it's very effective to sign up through UBC and have it deducted. So you've got the convenience of sort of payroll deduction if you want to do it that way, in which case you're then making the contributions with pre-tax dollars because it's deducted from your year's income. So you're not taxed during the year. So you've got the advantage of that, or you can just do a one-off once a year, decide how, if you've got room, you can make a lump sum payment. The thing to remember is these are strictly voluntary, which means it does not attract any contribution from the university. Okay, this is basically topping up the regular contributions to the plan. And another advantage as well is it can be withdrawn at any time. So you're not restricted, and you basically can withdraw it in cash, but obviously there'd be withholding tax kept. But yeah, I think that answers your question.
And Kamila, there's a couple questions on infrastructure. What is infrastructure? And just please say more about the infrastructure asset.
Okay, so I could talk about it for an hour or two. So I'll try to give a very high level answer. Infrastructure is a lot of things which we need to function as society. When you think about infrastructure, think about roads, think about hospitals, think about airports, think about ports. Think about things which basically allow us to function efficiently as society. So it's kind of like a extension to, it's a similar asset to real estate, but it's not necessarily a building. I think that's the best way of thinking about it. And it's different because it's depending on what kind of funds we will choose and which sectors of infrastructure the fund will be investing in. We can look what is driving the success of that fund and delivering the performance. So the reason of looking at infrastructure is for that very purpose, to include a new piece to the portfolio, which will behave differently than other pieces of the portfolio and not relying on exactly the same factors to drive positive return. I hope that's helpful. If not, I can take it offline because I can talk about it for very, very long.
Okay, Kamila, does the real estate investment have an impact on the housing crisis?
Does it? impact on the, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but our real estate is focusing on commercial real estate. So in our portfolio, we have exposure to residential buildings, but they are rentals. We have exposure to offices. We have exposure to retail. It's not necessarily, it's not directly connected to housing the way we as individuals are thinking about housing. If you and I are trying to buy a house and we being unbid because everybody wants a standalone house, for example. I'm probably not answering the question, but that's what we are exposed to. And for us, in our ward, our focus was more on retail investments, commercial retail investments. That part of the sector was really hurting our performance the most in the portfolio because with COVID and all the restrictions, obviously that part of economy was shut down for quite some time, and people who are renting from our properties owned by our managers had the most trouble and challenging to meet their rents, pay their rents.
Okay, and Kamila, for the equity funds, how do we get a list of the specific stocks that they are made of? This would help greatly to compare with my other registered investments.
That might be a bit problematic because showing all the underlying stocks for each of the manager, they don't necessarily want to make it public. What we could do if somebody is interested in to provide it with the time lag. So managers could give us a permission to share this information, but it would be an old information. So I'm not sure how useful that will be. Actively managed portfolios obviously change their allocation. So if something is a year old, I'm not sure that that will provide a very good comparison. But obviously, active managers are trying to build efficient portfolios using their knowledge and analysis, and don't necessarily advertise what's inside of their portfolio.
Okay, and Orla, if I leave UBC, what happens to my plan? What are my options?
When you leave UBC, you'll get a package that will set out your options. So it'll show that you're able to transfer the money outside of the plan if you wish. And because it's pension money, most of it will be locked in depending on how long you've been employed at UBC. But as well, I mean, great thing about the UBC plan is once you get that package, if you decide to do nothing, your money just stays in the plan. So you don't actually have to take any action. So you leave, you've got time to think through how you want to handle your money. So there's no urgency in making a decision within sort of 60 days of getting a package. And I would urge you to reach out and talk to somebody within our office so you understand your options and the benefits of them. And you saw a lot of people, in fact, leave their money in the plan because it is very attractive. If you transfer it out, you're going to be paying retail investment management fees, which are much more expensive.
And Orla, a couple of questions. Can I transfer funds in from my RRSP into the pension plan?
Yes. So those are treated and categorized as voluntary contributions, but because they're coming from a registered vehicle like an RRSP, there is no limit because they're already registered, so you can transfer the full amount into the plan. And a lot of people like to consolidate all their savings and retirement savings in one place. It makes it easier in terms of financial planning and also just in terms of tracking how their investments are doing.
And Kamila, you showed a slide that summarized management fees. Those percentages are for fund managers only, correct? And we also pay an administration fee for the pension office. Can you comment on that?
No, the fees which we were showing include all the costs. So all the administration cost is included in the fees which we were presenting in this presentation.
And Kamila, what criteria and benchmark are used to evaluate the performance of the infrastructure portion of the balanced fund?
On the infrastructure balance fund, that's something we are working on actually. So maybe I wasn't too detailed, just trying to go through all my slides, but we just established that we are interested in adding asset class, but our next step now will be to find appropriate managers, review available to us strategies, review their investment processes, fees, and their benchmarks. The benchmark will be established upon the choice of the strategy. A lot of managers out there will actually have a target performance, and having that sense when we actually choose the strategy will determine how we will decide to benchmark that.
Okay, and there's a question, if you know the rate of return for the fossil fuel free fund for the year, April 2020 to April 2021.
It is actually on this slide. So from April 1st to March 31st, it's right here. Fossil fuel 3 equity and bond fund for 1 year, 22% and 43 basis points right here. And the benchmark was at 20.59.
And one for Orla. Is there a penalty incurred by a faculty member should she take her pension monies out of the UBC fund upon retirement?
No, you're basically, when you go online, you see what your combined account balance is in terms of employer and employee contributions, and you're entitled to that full amount, and there's no penalty whatsoever. And another thing I'll highlight, we have some people who actually elect to transfer maybe some or all of their money out, and then they change their mind, and you can do that. And we've had people, you know, say in their 80s decide, you know what, I realize the advantage of the faculty pension plan, and then transfer their account balance, you know, or whatever they have in terms of retirement savings left over back into the plan. This plan, we're as flexible as possible within the rules that under the Income Tax Act and pension legislation. So our objective is to let people do what they want.
And Orla, can I transfer from a TFSA or a non-RRSP money?
No. And you can't, we get questions sometimes in terms of spousal RRSPs. That money isn't eligible to be transferred into the plan. It's only your registered money, registered pension monies.
Kamila, are there any plans to offer low-cost ETFs? Example, an S&P 500 index tracking ETF.
So I wouldn't call it a plan, but we are investigating possibility of utilizing ETFs in the plan. Our current provider of a platform for our plan, our administrator, Sun Life, is working on it. There's currently no other Canadian plan like ours utilizing ETFs. So our question is definitely showing that we investigating new things and trying to assess if that would be appropriate for us. But at that moment, logistically, it's not available to us, but it might be. We're working on it.
And Orla, can you define locked-in funds?
Okay, so under pension legislation, and in BC pension legislation was first introduced in 1992. Your money that accumulates after that date is considered locked in, which means you can't take it out and use it to buy a boat or an RV or go on a vacation. It has to be used to provide you with a stream of retirement income. That's what locked in means. So it's under legislation. For people who've been here a long time, they may have contributions that predate, in which case they're not locked in and can be withdrawn in cash. There's no limits on it. So when someone goes to retire and they have a mixture of, sort of pre and post, that's why they would put some money in the LIF, which is a locked in fund. And then the non-locked in funds would go into their RIF, because there isn't the same restrictions on it.
Kamila, why do you propose to lower Canadian equity from 15% to 10% in the balance fund when evidence suggests this is a strong component at present?
Because we don't time the market is a very short answer. And the longer answer is that we reviewed each component of our portfolio from the risk perspective, and combination of options available in Canadian market and in overall global markets, and taking into consideration that very detailed analysis, we concluded that we could get better returns in other places. So we really focusing on the alternative component of it, and our analysis showed us that taking some money from the Canadian equity is appropriate. But I could share more details on that if there is interest to see the work which we've done on that subject.
And Kamila, you indicated that a return of 8% in the balance fund going forward might be optimistic. Can you speculate as to what would be a likely return for this fund going forward?
Yes, I do not have a crystal ball, and I would love to see 8% again. And for a short period of time, maybe we will. It looks like there's a lot of appetite out there for risk assets. But looking at the economy and the cycle we are in right now, and talking to all of our managers, we have a strong indication that the optimism of a good recovery is really heavily priced into the markets right now. So going forward from here, it might be difficult to achieve a similar returns. And I've seen forecasts for global equities anywhere. Well, I would maybe, without going into many details, we got a forecast for balance fund without changing anything, that our ongoing return could be cut even in half. So that was a very pessimistic forecast, but we always like to look at the worst case scenario, and we want to see how we can address that. So the work done to diversify the sources of return is definitely going in that direction, and trying to make it less possible that we will see such a drastic drop in the performance going forward.
And when you want to invest in the fossil fuel free fund, is there a partial option, or do we transfer all our money into this fund?
It's up to the member. You can choose how much money you're putting into this option. It's definitely not forced to put all your savings in one option. It's an option like any other option.
And Orla, if you move abroad upon retirement, what are the options available to receive the pension funds?
They're the same. Obviously, in terms of your tax, your tax position, and residency, everything else, that you need to talk with Lorraine Hesseltine, who's our member specialist who deals with people retiring. Okay, but because she can walk you through that.
And Kamila, what do the equity portfolios consist of? Examples: stocks, options, derivatives?
Equity portfolios are mostly stock, and the strategies which we have right now on the equity side, I would call them a plain vanilla investments in underlying stocks. There might be from time to time a small portion of some contracts, especially on the global side. The manager can decide to hedge currency of portion of investments, but generally speaking, it's stocks.
And another crystal ball question, what's the forecast for foreign equities?
It depends who you want to talk to. There are managers out there who are saying that the return going forward for equities will be negative. So really, I really don't want to give that number because it really varies, and there are people who have very good stories for every number out there. But it's a crystal ball question. I really don't know personally, but I've seen a huge discrepancy in predictions, anywhere between minus slightly negative numbers to positive 7 and change %, close to 8% for equities.
Okay, there's one last question, and then there's other questions that we can answer offline. But the last question is there a risk in investing in assets that are not public?
There is a risk in investing in everything. If you don't want to have any risk, you could actually, even that, if you keep cash in your pocket, you're actually taking a risk. And right now, if you would talk to a lot of our managers, that risk is quite high because the expectation for a short-term inflation is much higher than it was even a month ago. So the power of purchasing power of your money in your pocket is losing. So that's also a decision to stay in cash. That also has risk. I think that's how I will address this question. Everything has a risk: public, non-public, cash.
All right, I think we're at our time.
Okay, we have come to the end of the time, and there are lots of terrific questions still in the Q&A box. We're delighted to have them all. We will answer them, and we'll post those answers to all those questions on the website. Just let me remind you that at any time over the year, feel free to be in contact with any members of the staff, particularly those who specialize in giving individual advice to members. Our ambition is to give you as much help and advice so that you can make the decisions that are best for you. So thanks for joining us today, and visit our website often. Thanks and good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.